Welcome, everyone, and look at the time. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Blanchard. I'm the founder and public sector director for GovNews, and it's great to welcome you to today's live event that we're hosting on devolution equals seismic revolution. For those of you who aren't fully familiar with GovNews, we provide news, views, insight, and innovation into government and public sector, and we produce all different types of content and learning materials for the public sector to be able to access in order to identify opportunities for transformation and for reform. We've been really excited to work with Matt and the team at Concerto and Bellrock in looking at estates efficiency and optimization. So today's online learning exchange is very much focused on some of those key themes and initiatives that we've already been covering in this series, including our recent podcast series, The People Behind the Buildings, where we've interviewed some senior estate professionals responsible for some of the most iconic public sector property and buildings across the country. So just before we start and I introduce my two panelists and we get going, just some housekeeping. This is a live event. The copy of our recent white paper, Estates 2.0, is available for you to download on this platform if you just scroll down from where we're streaming to you live now. All attendees will remain on listen-only mode, so we've not got the facility to be able to bring you onto the stage, but any questions or comments you want us to ask and put forward to our two guest panelists today, you can put those in the chat tab on your right-hand side. Hopefully you've been using that in the last few minutes to say hello to your fellow delegates. So one final point. We are recording this session, so after today, a copy of that recording and further content and collateral in the series with our work with Concerto will be sent to you so you can review it afterwards and share with other colleagues as well. So I'm going to get to my two panellists now. Joining me from Stockport Council, we have James Kington, who is the Assistant Director of Estates and Asset Management for the Council. James, good afternoon. Great to have you with us.
Afternoon, pleasure to be here.
And joining James, we have Matt Hickley. Matt is the Public Sector Specialist at Concerto. Matt, hello again. Great to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be here.
So let's get started. What I'd like to do is I've got some questions here. I'm going to come back to these throughout the session, but this is very much an opportunity for us to talk about some of these key themes and allow our attendees to post some of their questions. But what I'd like to discuss is the future of strategic authorities. What does the shift from the likes of combined authorities mean for governance and funding? I'd like to talk about public sector estates under devolution. So how will property management, planning, asset management, utilisation change under the new regional structures? And finally, local government reorganisation. What's going to be the impact of much larger unitary authorities when it comes to service delivery and infrastructure? So Jason, to begin with, do you want to tell us a little bit about your role as the Assistant Director of Estates and Asset Management at Stockport Council?
Yeah, so I'm currently responsible for the estate standing stock that Stockport manage. So that's everything from our offices and depots down to libraries and leisure centres. I'm also responsible for the design and technical service, who delivers all our capital projects, and that might be across our estate, or we do work with neighbours. I've also then got responsibility for the school estate, of which Stockport have 50 or so direct maintained schools left, and then I have the decarbonisation programme, where we're looking across our estate generally to try and get our green credentials improved. And then lastly, I've got what's called the investment and development account, and then the tenanted estate. So that's our trophy assets, which sit in the ID account. And for those familiar with Stockport, that's the shopping centre, the leisure scheme, and the office scheme in the middle of town. And then we've got beyond that quite a long tail of estate that we rent out for income purposes and also for business support purposes. And that ranges from small parades of shops in residential areas through to some quite large industrial estates, ground rents, things like that help generate some income to the council.
Now, what might become clear as well throughout this conversation to our listeners is our offices, GovNews, are actually based in Stockport as well. So I am going to sit on the fence, though, when it comes to this conversation. But
you're not a tenant yet, Mark, so you've got a bit of impartiality.
So from your perspective, Jason, what does the English Devolution Whitepaper actually mean for you in Stockport?
So we're obviously forward on the journey a little bit in terms of we've already got, the GMCA is already created, and we already work closely with our partners within the Greater Manchester area. We've already got a Metro Mayor. So I think the white paper starts to bring those benefits that we've already seen to other areas of the country. I think for Stockport in particular, it'll allow us to work probably even more closely with our neighbours. And it also allows for some of that devolution of spend and devolution of money, quite frankly, which Andy Burnham and the GMCA are really keen on. I think that local administration of some of those funds and that freedom will really help amplify some of the work that's already ongoing. Decarbonisation as an example, we were in a very sort of the nationwide PSDS schemes in order to unlock some of that income into our buildings. But the GMCA scheme will be a bit more tailored to what we need in Manchester, in Greater Manchester. I think that's already coming through in the way they're looking at those schemes, the way we've already done our first round of submissions of what we might want to work on. And they're already looking at some of the things that were becoming a bit of a barrier. So you used to have the need that if you'd put a new boiler in recently, that sort of excluded you from the project. Whereas now it can be a bit more flexible at that local level. And I think that flexibility of spend and that ability to roll up spend and go, well, actually, we've got flexibility over years as well as in year. So we might do a larger scheme over here in Bolton or in Stockport. And that might mean Stockport has to wait for their money a little bit. But sometimes you need that larger amplification of funds to really drive something forward. And I think we'll see that in some of the big structural projects that this government are keen to deliver. So, district heat networks as an example, large scale residential housing developments. We've seen it in Stockport with the powers that were brought forward for Town Centre West and our Mayoral Development Corporation. And that's now going to spread out into Town Centre East. And we're exploring the possibility of doing sort of expanding that area to make it sort of 3 times the size it is now. So I think to get that large scale investment and direct the money where Greater Manchester needs it and allow people on the ground to make those decisions and have a louder voice for Stockport in terms of where that money goes is where it will help us. But I think more nationally, it'll help other people get those benefits that we've already seen.
So, Matt, coming to you, you're the public sector specialist at Concerto. Could you tell us a little bit more about that role? And I suppose from Concerto's point of view and the organisations you supply to in the public sector, what does the Devolution White Paper mean to you and your customers?
Yeah, so thank you, Mark. So as a solutions consultant at Bellrock Technologies, I help local authorities turn dispersed property information into a single source of truth. Powered by Concerto, which is the local authority's leading IWMS or integrated workplace management system. We give councils a live view of every building, lease, maintenance task, and refurbishment project ongoing. The result equals an airtight compliance, on-time delivery of multi-million-pound works, and evidence-based decisions on estate rationalisation. Exactly what's needed, obviously, as the devolution, scales the portfolios and tightens budgets, essentially. What does it mean to us? Well, I see the white paper as a bit of a double signal. So on one hand, it says to local leaders, here's the power and a multi-year pot. Now prove you can kind of transform the places. And on the other side, I see it as, saying to suppliers like Bellrock, bring the digital plumbing that turns, ancient asset registers into live intelligence. So for us in kind of Bellrock Technologies, That's our Concerto platform, one version of the truth, across the new strategic authority. And that's how I see kind of devolution becoming a kind of seismic revolution rather than ultimately just a paperwork reshuffle.
James, apologies, I called you Jason earlier.
No,
So.
not a problem. But look, I think Matt makes a really good point, Mark. I think the ability for that data to be captured in really large ways is the key to really getting the true benefit of what government's trying to achieve with these changes. I think we're going to see it in a few different areas. I think that ability to bring personnel and expertise together, one of the things that prior to the paper that GMCA was already doing is they had expertise in decarbonisation, again as an example, that were dropped out into the boroughs. So we have a lady called Laura who sits with us sort of 4 days of the week, and 1 day of the week is back in central Manchester at GMCA. And that's allowing for that knowledge on a human level to spread round and come together in the middle and push back out to the boroughs. But I think the data architecture behind it will be hugely important. And I think it's not only will lead to more efficient financial delivery of some of what we need to do, but it will also generate opportunities. And it's that building utilisation. It's that knowledge around really specific things like asbestos and things like that. We'll be able to see that and share, because a lot of councils struggle with having those teams with that level of expertise, because there's not enough work thrown through to justify having 3 architects and 3 building surveyors like we used to. But I do think you'll start to see specialisms emerge. Stockport's really lucky. We've got a really strong design and technical team. But other boroughs have other sort of niches and specialisms that they've managed to build up. Our building control is not as big as other boroughs, as an example. So I think that ability to pool and share resources, but the only way to do that really well is as Matt says, to have that digital architecture behind it that makes it smooth.
So how does the move to strategic authorities, or how's it going to impact that long-term property and estates planning at local levels, do you think, James?
So I think hopefully it will allow us to make long-term decisions, first of all. I think that it's no secret that public sector finances have been really challenged. We do have some old creaking estate. We, in all honesty, I don't think it's any secret to say we don't have enough money to maintain and invest as we would like to. But I think the strategic authorities will start to allow us to make decisions that cross borders that ultimately give the best results to our residents. I think there will be some asset sharing. I think we've done a bit of it. We didn't have a huge amount of assets at Stockport that allowed us to rationalise, but you start to see it in the strategic estates groups, in the one public estate work, that when you do start to think cross border and do start to deliver the best thing for the residents and ignore some of the lines on the map, you start to get some really sort of transformational results. And I think it will allow us to make some of those decisions around things that are coming down the road that actually does every borough, and it's a question, I don't think we know the answer yet, but does every borough need its own depot? Does every borough need its own crematorium? And it will need bits of those services, not necessarily all of it. And I think that strategic view across a few boroughs joining together, and it's not about losing. If it's done right, it won't be about boroughs losing their autonomy, but it will be about that pooling of knowledge and resources and estate, quite frankly, that will allow us, because we've got a huge workforce, we've got big estate, but we're in a way of working now where actually, if there's someone in who works for Bolton Council who happens to live in Stockport, why couldn't they work 1 day a week in my office? But you need that frictionless background work to make that work, and we need to work closely together. And I think the political changes will allow that structure to come in behind it and deliver those kind of changes.
It's always been one of those questions for me, because if you look at the government hubs programme, it's exactly that. You've got these government hubs around the country, and if regardless of your civil service department that you work in, as long as you've got a gov.uk pass, you can go and work from one of those hubs and utilise those facilities. So if you're at DEFRA and you're normally based up in the northeast but down in London for 2 days, you can go into the government hub and work from there. The only other council equivalent I'm aware of is what they've tried to do across Kent, Kent Connect, where they've done that, but it was such a difficult thing to get off the ground based on, who funds it and who delivers it.
Always comes back to the funding, doesn't it?
It does always come back to the funding.
I think you're right, James. It is that mental shift, isn't it, of like how things will change, and I do hope they do change, down the line as kind of things settle. It's an interesting one. Right now, obviously, it's still very raw, and it will be raw for a long time, I'm sure. But it will be interesting to see how things play out. But I do hope that it does become a more of a, it's not about who's what's my buildings and who's paying for that building. It's more about how can we make better use of the space that that serves the public at the end of the day. And that's I think is the important message of all of this. But obviously that's a difficult thing from a change aspect to overcome.
But when you look at some of those infrastructure and often it comes down to buildings and assets, but you can see what's going on with the bus network in GM and the work that Andy Burnham's leading there, that we're being able to take a strategic view of the bus network and transport network across GM, investment being made in transport hubs. We've been really lucky in Stockport. We were one of the first out the gate. We've got the new interchange, which is fantastic, and without that GM amplification and all the sort of funding streams and expertise and cross-working that's brought, it would have been really, really hard to deliver. And we probably wouldn't have a new bus station with a massive park above it and a resi scheme attached. But we've been able to deliver that, and that's going to start to deliver green buses. And then there's now, conversations about the depots themselves and where's the best place in our borough to service everywhere else. And you start to knit those things together, and that's releasing investment and releasing sites for then further housing in the town centre. So you can start to see when you can think about it strategically, but it's all about working in partnership. It can't be dictatorial, and I think that that's one where GM works best is when it's in partnership.
Yeah. So, what other risks and opportunities do you foresee in shifting those estates' oversight from locally led to more regional bodies? James.
So look, I think the money and lack of control and who's dealing with what, I think it's, if you don't have integrated systems in behind it, then what we don't want is things falling down the cracks and Legionella checks. That real brass tacks basics has to happen to keep everyone safe, and then the layer beyond that is your utilization is the right task by the right person in the right place. That's how we try to lead our estate in Stockport, and I think it comes back to that point I made about partnership. I think the local members, local residents have to feel like and they already do feel like the local library belongs to them, as an example. And I'm not suggesting that these big regional bodies are going to take that off people, but those services are paid for by that council tax in that borough. So there's definitely a balance to be struck about what becomes centralised and what doesn't. And I think the risk is if people start to feel like it's being done to them rather than with them, then that support won't be there. And I think we can sit here all day and talk about frictionless operation of offices and your thing in Kent, but the proof's in the pudding. So the risk is that we don't have tangible benefits people can point to and go, do you know what, that's fantastic, and that's happened because we've got this new regional body. So I think the risk is that you spend a lot of time and money and resources to create something, and there isn't a strong visibility of the benefits that's delivered. And I think that's something that GM's done well, but as have other metro mayors. But if you don't see those things, then I think you can start to get stuck in the weeds of people losing faith in the project.
Yeah. No, I concur as a resident of Stockport as well. It's all about how those things are communicated to you as a resident. so that you see the benefits and the opportunities. Conversation I have quite often is when it comes to the devolution argument is, as a resident, you might move to a more affluent area, you pay more council tax, but then as part of a much larger body of councils, that money going elsewhere into other areas that are deprived, and you're paying the council tax level at a certain band and expect to see the benefits of that within the area and the services that you receive. But from Matt, your perspective, what risks and opportunities do you foresee in that kind of shift?
So I made a note of kind of a few opportunities that I kind of foresee, and I think one fundamentally is rationalisation of the portfolio at scale. So you touched on it a little bit, James, about identifying kind of underused or duplicated assets across the authorities. I definitely think there's a huge opportunity there to look at that and obviously see how that plays out. I think from a capital program coordination aspect, aligning the investment into things like schools, housing, transport, and the health infrastructure has some huge opportunities to maximise how the spending is being done in the right ways. And I think particularly around kind of pooling some of the funding streams in order to deliver across that wider geography. I think there's a huge opportunity there. I definitely see a massive opportunity from a procurement contract efficiency aspect, particularly around kind of standardizing service contracts and driving better rates and performance from suppliers. And that obviously affects organizations like us in particular in that case. But I think there's definitely an opportunity for in these kind of wider geography areas that more standardization and better rates relevant for the wider authorities. I definitely think also, particularly from a kind of systems data aspect, there's obviously a huge opportunity to improve that data quality and decision making. That comes from obviously streamlining and using tools, like Concerto to integrate this data together. And I definitely see a big opportunity to that, particularly where you've got some kind of smaller authorities, as we said, where they don't have the resources, they don't have the funding to have tools, like Concerto as a tool. So that brings an opportunity for them to be able to bring that in together and make better decisions together. And I think a stronger alignment with a more regional policy, I think there's again a big opportunity for that. I think from a risk aspect, there's definitely a risk of the compliance gap piece as you transition, as you mentioned. I definitely believe that as well, and I think and we've seen that with working with others that have kind of come together into a unitary that they need, there's a need to make sure that the day-to-day stuff is still ticking along and is still happening and not being missed because we're trying to bring together data from different spreadsheets, five spreadsheets or multiple systems into one system. There's definitely a risk there of that. There's a potential risk, of course, of the loss of the local knowledge, and you touched on that a little bit, and I do agree that could happen. But I think there needs to be some real synergy on that point, and hopefully there isn't. Some other risks are kind of come up with is around kind of delayed decision making. So as the bodies get larger, there's additional layers of governance put in place. Does that make decision making slower? More sign-offs and such like. There's a potential risk of that, but again, it's about doing this and doing it right. So that's some of the kind of key points that I kind of come up with as always, kind of reading through things.
Well, it's taken 20 or so minutes for the comments to start coming in, so that's good. I actually have a question that I'd written down, but I'm going to take Ben's comment. A very positive message on joint working across Greater Manchester, working in a district that could disappear under LGR. What would be the challenges to merge property information into any new, larger unitary? James?
So we touched on some of this already, but although this was done in a disorderly manner, the sort of one of the challenges I've faced at Salford and where I was previously and at Stockport is we've had those changes where at Salford Urban Vision as an outsourced property function, which then came back into Salford Council, and then we had an outsourced property function at Stockport, but unfortunately that was with Carillion and that collapsed. So in both instances, we've had to deal with that data migration and that knowledge loss and those sort of challenges coming forward. I think it's about how we've all heard the horror stories from from some of the things that went wrong when the sort of last swathe of big mergers happened in some of what happened in the 70s, and then even more recently, we all heard stories about a council who have got a building that they'd forgotten they had, and it's been sat there, and no everyone, oh well, Bill used to look after it, Bill retired 3 years ago, no, Bill didn't tell anybody, and now it's there. So I think the dangers are there anyway. But the danger is clearly that stuff gets forgotten as it's moved across, and it won't be the big buildings, it won't be the head offices, it will be the garden tenancies, it will be the grazing rights, it will be the the sort of small bits and bats of land that knock around. And it's most extreme, I suppose. The danger is there that no one notices. You get an adverse possession and someone ends up with owning a patch of land that was the council's, or a ransom strip's in place, and that causes problems down the road. So that at its most extreme could cause you a big problem. And I mean, Matt will be able to talk better than me to this, but one of the challenges that will come through is people have different data in different pots, and merging that together can be really challenging. And it's something that a lot of councils won't necessarily have the expertise in IT teams or in estates teams to handle that merge and handle that swathe of data. But Matt, clearly more knowledgeable than that than me.
You've been lined up.
Oh, good. I like that. Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen that, and it's a real thing that has played out with other unitaries that we worked with that have merged together. And the biggest challenges in that is that they are all working off different data sets, different spreadsheets, different systems, and how it's really worked well in the past is kind of creating kind of centralized platforms and centralizing the data together. But it needs a lot of work, and ultimately, it becomes a real technical challenge, of course, and also the cultural change of kind of getting into a common language around assets and estates, and we call it that, and we categorize things this way, and that becomes a real challenge, but a challenge that can be overcome, and ultimately the outcome of it, of course, is that you then can transition well and have a standardized language and use. Also, you mentioned things don't get missed, and that's the important point around a lot of this, particularly from a data aspect, is ensuring that that all that local knowledge stuff is captured and is brought into any wider systems if that happens, in order to make sure that things do tick on and are compliant, and we're not missing things and such like.
Ben, I hope that gave you some insight into that challenge that you're potentially going to have to face. But I'm going to move on to a comment from Danny. The conversation up until that point had focused on urban. Here, obviously, we were talking about Greater Manchester, Stockport. What about the rural areas and their needs? And Danny goes on to say DWP does not have statutory duties for nature and climate. Can you comment, please? Any thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, so look, I think some of the challenges are the same as it comes forward. I think GM, as an example, has got large, sort of swathes that aren't urban. I think rural areas need a different set of expertise at times, and I think that's one of the challenges that I'd hope can be addressed by some of these bodies. I think some of that investment at scale. So you look at what's gone on, and we are not part of the GM spatial framework in Stockport. Our members took a decision to step out of that, but what that aims to achieve is to put protect Greenbelt, for example, by putting the right buildings and the right property in the right places, and actually say, well, Salford, you can have density and high rise, and therefore perhaps you can take some of the numbers that will then protect some land in somewhere like Rochdale, on more of the sort of rural fringes. So I think that can come through. I think you'll allow, that expertise and personal thing comes through. We're very fortunate in Stockport that we've got some ecologists on staff. Not all councils have that, and I know those get shared out with other boroughs to try and help that. So I think it's that share of knowledge, and we are quite a mixed borough, but others aren't, and where you have got a very urban borough that might then be come under the auspices of rural and urban together under an overarching GMCA type body. Both sides will have things they can teach the other, and I think it's important that knowledge share goes ahead.
Danny, you made another comment as well. Lack of surveyors, other building specialists seems to be a problem. Going back to what you were just talking about, James, in terms of sharing knowledge and skills and insights, and what insights are there about how the change will improve the situation? And then Matt, another comment to you from Danny, who's great, vocal in the comments section. Based on that data you were talking about, is there a best standard of data to follow? So, James, to you first on the skills.
Yeah, so look, Danny's right, and it's something that we face all the time. I think at its best, I think the answer is to develop and train. So prior to being in the council, I was at CBRE, and they had a fantastic track record of bringing through surveyors and creating those opportunities for surveyors to come through and graduate programs. But you'd see it sometimes. Some estates teams now in councils, because of the way the finances have gone, have really shrunk, and to create that opportunity where you can bring through an apprentice or develop a surveyor through and fill the gap that way is really hard. I think councils can be really clever and take people, be a bit more flexible. I've had real joy in the past by taking female members of staff who are on maternity leave, and then we're looking for a slightly different pace of work when they were coming back in. But I think and GM, we've had a situation where GM have taken on some centralised sort of graduate staff, and then they've been pushed out to the districts to do some of their training and gain some of the experience. But that ability to be able to shift people around, and I know it can happen anyway. Certain authorities will have a really good relationship with their neighbour, but that ability to be able to formalise things, and for me to take on a graduate surveyor who then potentially could go and work in other boroughs. A couple of my graduates went over to Tameside at one point, but to be able to offer them a wider experience, and especially from Danny's point for my guys don't get much opportunity to get experience of rural surveying. I'm sure in a rural borough this sort of reverse is true. So that share of knowledge, and we should be in a position where it's not going to be frictionless, but where people can have that opportunity to move around, and be really honest about those structures going forward. One thing that private sector businesses in surveying do far better than the public sector is career paths going forward. That's really hard to deliver in a small borough. I've got, when we talk about chartered surveyors, I've got, if I don't include myself in sort of management roles, we've got sort of 5. Now, if you're the junior person coming in, it does become dead man's shoes, and that's a really hard thing to do. But then we could create a situation where people can go off and get that experience within other bits of a larger authority. And when you actually scale up and look at all of GM and all our estates teams, plus the GMCA estates team in the middle, actually you're a decent sized surveying firm at that point. Yeah. You can start to give people those opportunities to move around. You can start to send someone somewhere else for their APC interview, or for some experience that I'm lacking because I've got a lot of industrial but not much offices, and as part of their APC process and training program they need that. It also, you can then engage on things like universities at a different scale, the GMCA level and Andy Byrne level. You can engage at that at a different level with the university and get out across all the boroughs. And then you can bring in some programs like we've got now. There's a future leader program across GM. There's 3 levels to that, and I've got 4 staff on it at the moment. I've got 6 staff who've already been through it. Those connections and developments that they build, because you can do it at scale and share those ideas, are really seeing dividends in staff training. And I think until we can give a better career path and a better career opportunity and really shout about that for the younger generation, then I think we're always going to struggle with numbers and surveyors, because there's a shortage nationally anyway. It's not, surveyors isn't just a problem for public sector, it's a problem for everybody.
Matt, coming back to your specialist area, the question around, is there a best standard for data when organisations are going to be bringing this all into one? And David's comment, he mentions about merging and interfacing IT and data between councils is potentially a looming disaster. Think Birmingham. Is his comment. Very brave of you, David, to name names. But we have heard the horror stories about IT, data, interoperability, standardizing data, all these councils, different suppliers, different systems working in different ways. What's the answer?
Well, the answer is there's no single gold standard that fits every organisation. There's definitely, of course, best practice frameworks that I believe local authorities should align with. So, what we've seen from a kind of estates and asset management aspect, using the likes of Uniclass or NRM for consistent classification of the assets across the estate. The use of SFG20 for operational standards as well, highly used across the local authority space now. But there's many different kind of frameworks out there. But I think the importance is to ensure that there's a clear data ownership and governance and lifecycle rules in place. So ultimately, everyone knows kind of what's held, why we're holding it, and who's responsible for keeping it accurate. And that's been the biggest downfalls that people have had, where they get all this good data in place, and then nobody, is then responsible for maintaining it and keeping it on top of it. So they spend a lot of money going out getting, asset verifications done, and all these good things and condition surveys, but then nobody kind of keeps on top of it and manages it beyond. So ultimately, we don't impose any standards. We support councils in adopting the right frameworks for their estate maturity and goals. But I think, the key is consistency across the organisation. And without that, even the best systems just become a digital mess of, silos. And with it, data becomes the foundation for, smarter estate planning, investment, and ultimately the service delivery.
Okay. James, we've had a couple of comments about the transferring of assets to parish and town councils ahead of merging into the larger unitaries. What benefits or challenges may we see with this? What risks need to be kept in mind? Mike continued with it on that comment, saying that we're looking at transferring assets, including nature areas, car parks, to larger civil parishes rather than up to a larger unitary. Any comments or experiences to that approach?
So I've not, honestly, I've not got a direct experience of that approach. I think, what I would suggest is it's all about having the right asset in the right place. And I think that there's still some hangovers from the reorganisation that happened in the 1970s. There were some weird things built as smaller councils emptied their reserves because they didn't want to hand it into the centre. They wanted to get it spent. They wanted something done in their area. So they built a leisure centre, a theatre, a dry ski slope, whatever it might have been. Some of those were great successes, don't get me wrong, but some of them are still then assets and liabilities now in some instances that sit with the successor authority and are stuck there as a problem. I think if things... it's about having the governance and the legals correct, because things could sit in whatever pot, but I think as long as we can create a situation where that doesn't become a barrier to future opportunities and future work, I think it's taking each asset on its merits. I think the ultimate situation of an ownership around a park, for an example, a park is probably, you would hope, going to remain a park. So where that sits, it probably shouldn't cause a huge problem. Something like a car park might be slightly different, because what we don't want to create is a problem in the future that car park is sat next to another piece of land that's held by someone else. We want to develop it, and we create those problems going forward. So I think the risk is that you end up with the wrong thing in the wrong pot, and we end up with barriers to future development and future investment into wherever that may be. There's probably some opportunities around protection of land and assets, and everyone does these things with the right intentions. But I think the biggest pitfall I'd be concerned about is sort of twofold: that you end up with the wrong thing in the wrong place, and you have that friction, or something ends up with an authority that doesn't, or a body that doesn't have the right money or expertise to maintain it and keep it right going forward, because that's another problem that can occur with some of these things, that if you haven't got the scale and expertise to maintain it and look after it, we don't necessarily do the best thing by that asset going forward.
Okay. Grace, Mike, I hope that's answered that question. Based on what you were talking about earlier, Matt, on the data side, Michelle thinks that having many system migrations under her belt, her answer is get some good data analysts in. They're worth their weight in gold. I think everyone would agree if that's an option to them and they have the opportunity within the organisation to do that. But let's say in hindsight, on the other side of things, if being able to bring in that skills and apply data analysts to help you with those migrations isn't an option, what's the answer?
I mean, it's a tricky one, of course, and yeah, I think best will in the world, everyone would have some decent data analysts in their teams already that understand their data, understands the complexity of their data sets, and can bring all these different data sets together to get them into a consistent format. But there are obviously some very good external consultancy organizations growing in the market as well that specifically are focusing themselves on these types of activities, and I think there'll be some big growth in some of the activities and work that those guys do. We've worked with some previously that that are very, very good at what they do and are able to to support different organizations in different platforms in order to correlate all this data together and actually make sense of all this different disparate data coming from various different sources. So I think ultimately, though, it needs a good strategy from the very beginning, which is understanding what you've got, understanding why you're storing it, and understanding what you're going to do with it moving forward. I think is the important aspect of this, because getting together all this different data is one thing, but it's actually understanding and interpreting the data and how you're going to use that data moving forward, which is the more important part of it. So I think the strategy part of it is what organizations can manage, even if they don't have the resources and the actual analysts themselves. There's many people out there, as Michelle says, that are great at this, and or consultancy organizations that are supporting many organizations right now in doing exactly that process.
So we've had a question from, I'm not sure how they got onto this webinar actually, it's a contractor. Maybe they've got a gov.uk email address perhaps, but they make a very valid point. So I am going to ask their question. They said that they're a contractor, they're a highways partner for a large number of councils in current two-tier areas that will undergo LGR. As a contractor, and I suppose, James, this is from your perspective, the advice that you give to your supply chain, how can they best help and support local authorities navigating the complex shift to new unitary authorities? Are you giving any advice to your supply chain as you're going through, and in order to deliver the contracts that are going to benefit the residents and the communities in the future?
So obviously, if it's an existing contract, there's going to be a legal process in place, and hopefully, to some extent, the contract will tell you how to manage that through. I would say the best suppliers are always those ones that at the end of the phone that will stand by you, that when something like this is going on, they reach out and ask. So I would be absolutely suggest that any sort of contractors in that position. And we've seen it with our own contractors, and some are much better at this than others. But the ones you remember are the ones who've reached out, picked up the phone, see you're facing this challenge, James, how can we help? Or better still, we're doing this help. We've got these people over here and they're doing it this way. We that's working well. We could do that for you. I think it's all about opening that dialogue and having that conversation. I mean, it's hard to talk, clearly to talk about particulars about any, every contract's going to have its own nuances, and every service will. But clearly, what is being done will still need to be done. There's still potholes to fill. There's still that maintenance contract works that need doing, and scaling up will no doubt generate opportunities for those contractors, because next borough may or may not have the same contract, and there will be a load of work to be done about aligning contracts. As Matt said, there's opportunities then to go out as a larger group and get different pricing opportunities. But I think the best thing to do is to be in conversation with that key decision maker, not in a pushy way, but just as a supportive support.
What can we do on your journey?
What can we do to help? Can we be part of the conversations? And can we share the knowledge? And sometimes it's as simple as helping someone in my shoes make those connections. And if you as a contractor are dealing nationally, I'm not. I'm in GM. But if you know that, as an example, you've got certain areas are going to move faster than others. If you're working closely with an area that's moving fast and you're learning things, even that offer of, well, actually, James, I know this lady Laura over here is in a similar role to you. They seem to be about 6 months ahead. Do you want me to make a connection? Even things like that can just be worth their weight in gold. And those are the contractors and suppliers that you remember. And whilst we've got to procure things properly, and I'm not suggesting people get special favours or anything like that. However, those are the contractors you remember, and those are the ones that
are going to make a difference.
They can make a difference to you, and value add.
It's about being, a long-term partner, right? Though, rather than just a provider, and I think that's the shift change, particularly from a vendor aspect. Being transparent, flexible, and collaborating are kind of three key themes that we've adopted in wanting to become and shift more to being a partner, not a provider. And I think resonates rightly for everybody. I think those that do open up and share and become part of the journey together are going to be those that thrive in the new landscape, essentially.
And obviously we know that Concerto are doing this really well, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this webinar, would we? So you're trying to do it, you're leading by the front, you're saying let's focus on these areas, let's talk, let's share knowledge, exchange ideas. We should be seeing a lot more of that come out from industry suppliers to the public sector, so that it's giving them an opportunity to be involved in the conversation. But when it comes back to that comment that we had from the contractor, I think, yes, from a procurement perspective, what's in the contract will be clearly outlined, but I'd recommend you talk to your customers and see where they're at in terms of their journey and move that forward. Matt, we couldn't have a conversation about data and technology without moving on to AI. So I'm conscious of the time. How's AI going to help? Is it the answer when it comes to maybe the data, the information, the governance? What's exciting you in terms of the AI applications that you're using in Concerto and Bellrock? What benefits are councils and public sector going to see when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think AI will help, particularly in the whole data aspect of things. We're trialing in our platform the use of AI to interpret and interrogate data sets, real complex data sets, in order to make help and guide decisions. But ultimately, it becomes it's a decision that the organisation needs to make, but based on an informed decision based on crunching data. And when we're talking about big complex backlog maintenance data sets and such, like how do I utilise my maintenance budget to to try and meet some of that backlog? AI can really help in that, and that's some of the values that we've seen in some of our beta testing. Posing it questions of, I've got X amount of money, how can I spend that to manage the biggest risk? Obviously some of that can be done with relevant consultants and such like, but that takes longer. So AI definitely can help in some of those spaces, and we're definitely trialing that. We're putting a lot of investment into our products to support and use AI models to, particularly around the data aspects anyway, but it will also be being used for doing some more kind of predictive maintenance aspects and looking at some of the other data sets as well in our wider aspect of our roadmap. So yeah, I think AI is definitely going to be an answer. I don't think it's the answer, but I think it will be there to support organisations and help organisations to understand the data sets and make decisions more strategically together. I would very much risk against it being and using it to make the decisions, because of course it's based on relevant data sets and knowledge and behaviors, and that obviously might not align with the relevant strategic direction of the organization. So there's definitely risks in there of using it, but that's why we're doing a lot of work in this space to test it and see how it can better be used to help organizations.
Sorry, just to
on
there. So could it do something, Matt? I'm just trying to think of a use case, but like where I've got, say, a large estate and some of it's looked after by other people, schools and things like that. do you think AI would be able to help us with things like spotting of like, well, hang on, why is that school's gas bill quite so high? You know, that's the spotting those anomalies. Is that a sort of use case?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and that's the way that we're trialing it in our platform today, and looking at different data sets across a very complex estate, and benchmarking against different buildings of different types, and bringing together, because once it's got the data, obviously it can crunch the data more more quickly than a human can. That's the importance of it. So gathering the data is the important bit. The intelligence or power in AI is its computing power to analyze that data and come back with some results. So yeah, there's some really good use cases, and there's been loads thrown at us from our customers about how AI could be used to help them. So we're definitely trialing lots of those in the background in our roadmap, and we've just hired a head of AI and data insights into the business as well. So they're going to be leading in this for the organisation, and they're looking at many of those use cases and some of the development that we can do to help them bring that AI models and the power of that into the product, and or into our more kind of analytics suite that we're going to be rolling out shortly as well, where it can then crunch that data and present information and findings or ideas forward as well.
I was at an AI event this week, and yeah, it was very much focused on the technologies there. It's being developed. Use cases are extremely useful, obviously, as are fail fast cases. It's not always going to work, and public sector needs to get used to failing fast in order to innovate. But it does all come down to the data. It's about the platforms it's on, how it's being used, how it's standardized, comment that's come in. Wouldn't it be great perhaps to develop a playbook for data handling? And obviously that would then have significant benefits. I'm conscious of the time. We advertised today's webinar just for an hour, and I've kind of gone on a little bit because the conversation was going particularly well, I thought, at one point, but I know we've got about 5 or so more minutes, and then James, I'll probably let you shoot because I know you're extremely busy, but Matt, if you could hang about and we could maybe get to that demo, but maybe use the next 5 or so minutes just to kind of cover a couple of other questions or comments that might come in. One that I've got, which I did want to ask, was any ideas about how capital funding for estates and regeneration is likely to be allocated under the new devolution arrangements?
So, take the example that I'm closest to in terms of GM. So what's happened for GM is we've now got a sort of percentage of flexibility. So we've got, I think it's 8 sort of capital areas where budgets are brought across to us. And what the flexibility that's been given to a GMCA level, which is going to be really beneficial, is that there's a percentage of flexibility both within year or within the pot, but also between pots. So if there was a particularly transformative scheme that we wanted to deliver for GM and it was short of cash, the GM can make those decisions to unlock that money, and it might mean not doing something. Clearly, it always means not doing something else, but if we might take a strategic decision to take some money out of one pot one year to put in another pot to allow that to go forward. And I think that will come into those strategic decisions about housing and about industrial and about jobs. So I think an example of that might be that sometimes you need that first piece of infrastructure. Someone's got to pay that first big chunk of infrastructure to get a scheme away, to get a site away. It might be that junction off a road. It might be bringing in power, those kind of things. And I think the ability of GM now to move money between pots and go, do you know what? This is going to be strategically important for the whole of GM. So therefore, we want to support this MDC over here that's going to release, it's going to bring a job, it's going to bring a factory, it's going to bring a load of knock-on investment into the region. Then actually, we're going to shift some money around and we're going to make that happen. And that shifting between pots has often been frustrating in the public sector, that you sit there and go, well, why are we spending that over there? If I could put those 2 things together, I could deliver this thing, rather than these 2 things that I'm less bothered about. I could deliver the big thing in the middle. And that flexibility, I think, is what will be transformative.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, but I think there's going to be a big focus on the ability to evidence the outcomes I think that'll be a big part of how the funding ultimately is used correctly. And I think a lot of that will come back to how you're going to model the different scenarios and become kind of investment ready for different aspects. But I definitely agree with you. I think the whole shift, and there's definitely going to be a lot more flexibility in how that funding can be used, rather than trying to fight for kind of central funding, which has always been a bit of a nightmare.
Mm. So we talked at the beginning of the webinar about like the government hubs program, and they're building one in Piccadilly in Manchester. But with greater regional powers, how do you see the relationship between local government and national government bodies changing when it comes to potentially estate sharing and utilisation?
So I think we're beginning to see it on the fringes. I think it's sometimes the size of organisation talking to each other makes a difference. There's a different weight of conversation that Andy Burnham or Caroline Simpson in their GMCA roles can have versus even our chief exec and leader. Which you're representing an area the size of Greater Manchester, it obviously carries that bit more weight in the halls of power down at Westminster. So I think that helps. I think in terms of that sort of frictionless stuff, we're seeing, and it's definitely changed over the last few years, but there does seem to be a shift from some of the national government staff of they look at our estate first. So we've had conversations around some emerging government requirements. We've already moved the probation office, for example, in Stockport's come into our estate. The ICB team has come into our estate. Yeah. We're doing some work elsewhere where police and NHS property services are combining into our estate to make things happen. So I think there's definitely been a shift in that, and I think this will accelerate it, that there will be that need. And I think what we're getting a bit better at is cutting through some of the financial conversations and getting to better and not letting who's paying for which light bulb get in the way. Because if everyone can see the bigger picture, there's some much bigger benefits, and you might have to accept that actually I was paying for that light bulb before, so if there's no, let's not let perfect get in the way of better.
Yeah.
How have you noticed any challenges with the culture of those organisations all kind of coming under one roof and being able to work together?
Look, there's always a bit of friction. So look, we're different organisations, people operate in different ways, but it's one thing that councils are really good at, Mark, because there is no more diverse organisation in this country than a local council. The broad church of services you are offering and staff you are working with is unrivaled, and I think so. Therefore, we're good at getting over those things when they arise. I'm a property professional who comes from a private sector background, who's worked at corporates and is now in the private sector. I'm often engaging with and working with a social worker who's got, they don't care about the pound, shillings and pence. Their job is keeping children and adults safe. Yeah. And their measure of success is not pound, shillings and pence. It's like, it can be life and death. So that's one of the big things I really try and drill in my team, because I'm going to assume there's a lot of property people on this call, and we've probably all had the conversation where someone sat in the corner and rolled their eyes and gone social workers when there's been some issue coming from the office. But I think we have to bear in mind that if the minimum I can do for someone who's going out and dealing with some of those really hard issues at the moment is make sure they come back to an office that's functioning, well, quite frankly, if I can't do that, I'm not doing my job properly. And I totally understand why the vent of frustration comes out against the fact that they've sat down and the chair's broken. Really, they're frustrated about the fact they know there's a child over there in a really crap situation, but it comes out over here, and I think we have to be cognizant of that. But because we're used to working in those environments, working with colleagues with such disparate sets of challenges, we can get over those challenges in a way that I think we can share offices with other organisations far easier than, say, CBRE could share with a PwC or a Deloitte. Yeah. So I think we do better at it. I think it's one of our strengths.
And I think if you take that approach as well to then data, albeit you go through the right governance procedures, but you don't let information governance be a blocker but be an enabler, then when it comes to utilising the technology like from Concerto, applying the AI to it, making huge savings through predictive analytics and AI-driven decision-making, then the opportunities when bringing all of these organisations and different data sets together is vast. But James, I'd like to thank you for joining us. It's been really insightful having you here today. There's been lots of other comments and questions that, sadly for our attendees, I've not got time to cover. I promised Matt who's going to get a chance to show us some of this amazing tech. So we are going to go straight to a demo, although I know on the timing wise, we advertise this just till 1 o'clock. But James Kington from Stockport Council, thank you very much for joining me. And Matt, I'm now going to hand over to you to show us some of this amazing technology. But hopefully our attendees can stay with us. And if there is any other comments following Matt's short demo of the tech, we're happy to pick those up with those who are still around afterwards. But thank you very much for joining us.
Mark, so first things first, it makes sense for me to explain that Concerto is part of the Bellrock Group. The Bellrock Group is a circa £200 million plus property and facilities management company that employs over 1,800 people and around 1,000 customers. The Bellrock Group ultimately consists of 3 key divisions. So technologies for which the Concerto product lives within and that I head up for the public sector, our consulting division for turnkey solutions, and our workplace services division. So whether organisations need surveying services such as measure drawings, asset capture, design services or fire-related consultancy, or you need a 24/7 call centre, total facilities management services, or a principal contractor, the Bellrock Group can help, all underpinned by our award-winning technologies in Concerto and Mobius. So it's important to really discuss and talk about what an IWMS or integrated workplace management system is. And ultimately, it is a single platform that allows organisations to manage a range of land and property assets through its life cycle, ultimately used to manage risk from statutory compliance and commercial. And in terms of what is Concerto, well, Concerto is effectively a next generation platform, a step on from a traditional system that is purely focused on maintenance. So typically, CAFM platforms. And there's some key pillars within Concerto, and that is our CAFM solution, estates management, project and program management, as well as intelligent workplace, asset verification and analytics. So let's head over to the Concerto now, and I want to guide you through some of the different views of Concerto. So first things first, I could be, a director of estates and want to log into Concerto on my laptop here, my MacBook Air, and view things like the executive summary or budget summaries. Equally, I may be a self-serve user, have a light touch access to the application, logging in on a tablet, phone, or my desktop or laptop accordingly, and can interact with the application through a series of buttons for the ability to raise a job, view a job, maybe view compliance certificates, or do some job satisfaction feedbacks for the location that I'm linked to. Equally, I might be an estates employee and have access to the estates calendar and have visibility of the different dates relating to lots of different agreements, such as break clauses, lease terminations and rent reviews. I might be out in the field and need to manage permits and assign and approve particular permits, and again can do that through functionality within Concerto. Equally, I might be related to a particular project. In this case, we've got a refurbishment project related to the Concerto City Hall, and equally here we can manage things like the road log, and the governance in terms of checklists, and in this case, replicating the Rebus data works. Equally, I might be a mobile engineer out in the field, either internal or external, when utilising mobile app functionality to pick up my jobs and interact with them and close jobs out accordingly. On the other hand, I might be out in the field and needing to manage particular fire risk assessments, and I can utilise the Mobius platform for that. And if we log into Mobius here, we've got a fire risk assessment, and on here we can then navigate through and complete the relevant checklists accordingly. So lots of different views, equally different people linked to different security profiles and permissions, and can log into the application and manage for the roles and responsibilities that they require within the application. So over here, I'm going to log back in here as my CAFM user. And as I showed earlier, we have many insights within Concerto, some of these such as our executive summary for PPM compliance and budgetary. We also have some supplier stats insight pages, compliance insights, and some workforce statistics. First off, I'm going to guide yourselves through looking at a site record. So it's kind of like the site biography page, or kind of like a LinkedIn profile page, essentially, relating to a particular site. And a site in Concerto is a collection of buildings and/or land area that you have a responsibility for. So here in my example, I'm using the Concerto City Hall, a fictitious City Hall, and nice image of a City Hall here. On the right-hand side, we can see the site area for which this site has its boundaries for. At the top here, we can see some headline information around the site. And further down, we can see information around compliance for this site, so broken down into statutory and non-statutory. We can see some information in fields of data around the site, so location, status, tenure, categorizations of sites. We can also jump out and view records such as valuation records or asbestos records very quickly from these site records. Further down, we can see information about the area breakdown and any buildings and or land areas that are the responsibility as part of this site. And each of those also, have data fields captured around them, and we can, pinpoint the exact locations of those from the views here. Coming back to the top, I'm going to guide you across some of the tabs here, which summarize information from modules within Concerto. So first off, looking at the Planner tab. The Planner tab brings together data from estates-related information, such as termination notices, lease terminations, break clauses, as well as cyclical activities that can cover across hard and soft FM, so things like grass cutting, as well as other activities like sprinkler system checks. We can also ingest and use condition data in Concerto, so condition survey analysis at the top here, looking at across the different costings for the different priorities. Further down, looking at the different element group types across the different priorities and the costings around those. And further down, looking at financial year on year versus those element types, and some graphical views of the same information. And each of that information can be managed in its own right within the relevant modules in Concerto. Coming further across the top, we can also manage lease agreements in Concerto. And the lease tab here for this particular site shows us the invoice schedule for this one site. So can capture and show us various different aspects of invoice schedules, such as rent and service charge for agreements either in or out. Further down, we can capture information around rentable units, and further down, we can jump out to those particular records. So if I wanted to look at the particular lease agreement for this tenant here and all the information captured around it, I can quickly navigate out to that should I have access to do so. Coming back across the top, we can also see and view some information around any projects or orders on this particular site. So here we've got a number of different projects, the relevant budgets, current status, and any risk flags here, and the current progress of those projects. We can also store and capture energy and running costs in Concerto. So we can capture things like meter readings, and that can be meter readings across various different disciplines. We can also equally capture annualized running costs and consumption costs, and store EPC and DEC ratings. Further across the top, we can cut and dice the spatial data, so how much space is being used on circulation, administrative. We can view on a map where the location is, so pinpointing here using longitude and latitude or eastings and northings, but on the right-hand side, as you've seen already, we also have the ability to outline the particular land boundaries for which this site correlates. Further across the top, we can also show the red box, and the red box is effectively a digitization of the physical red box that you typically would have within a property. This also can equally be shared via the self-service pages. So relevant, building managers, for instance, can have access to the red box and have visibility of the most recent compliance certificates and the evidence relating to them. From a CAD aspect, we can also ingest and use DWG files. So those DWG files, CAD files, can essentially be used to create and maintain the floors and areas and rooms within properties. And that then allows us in Concerto to be able to select a particular space, view information about a particular space, and that might be information that comes from the CAD drawing, but equally could be information that is just stored in Concerto and was never on the drawing. So for instance, information around assets, so this fan core unit, the relevant barcode, serial numbers of this particular asset, and maybe also some occupation details. In this case, Department A is occupying that particular room within this floor. This sort of information typically is held within Concerto and not on the drawing. Equally, what this allows us to do is to use overlays in Concerto, so we can, overlay information such as asbestos risk, capacity status, cleaning areas that have been considered, so whether they're daily, weekly cleanings, the costings from a condition aspect, again banded in different ways, and equally looking at things like room sub-use and how that space is being utilised on a particular floor. Each of those can be reported out accordingly and saved out as PDFs. Coming back to the views here, we can equally also view and look at 3D models in Concerto, so where they've been externally hosted, in this case an Autodesk Viewer IFC file. We can see here a particular mechanical view here, and this equally allows us then to be able to look at particular property information directly from the BIM model. So in this case, we've got this chiller unit here, and we can see information on capacity and weight. And then further across the top, the final tab on the site page is the compliance tab. And this gives a summarized view of the compliance activities. So for each of the activities that happen, so air handling unit checks 12 monthly, 1 monthly, 3 monthly, 6 monthly, what's the compliance outcome of each of these? And we can drill into the detail of any outstanding remedials. Okay, so that's covered from the site view aspect of things here. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about reporting. So in Concerto, we have our inbuilt report engine, Quick Reports. This allows us to quickly build reports. So here I can add a new report and give it a name, Matt's report or Matt's site report. We can share this report with all users or only specific users. So maybe, I only want to share this with, James and myself and have a report that's only available to us two. We can then create reports based on table of data, tile-based reports, chart-based or map-based. In this case, I'm going to do a table report. And we base these on pre-existing queries. So there's no need to know kind of coding in Concerto, very low code solution. Effectively, you'll have a master query for each of the functional areas of Concerto that you are licensed for, and then can very quickly create reports using drag and drop. So here I'm able to quickly build a report through, I want the fields such as site UPRN, site name, status, tenure, operational status, groupings, all this good stuff. Lots of good information and tabs of data. We can format particular columns, so we can format them in particular ways. We can also make particular search parameters available to people. So should they want to be able to search on particular status fields, then we can also make those available. These reports can be saved. They then are available to then be used and put onto groups of dashboard pages for users, but equally they can also be used for scheduling reports. So here I'm able to schedule a report, send this out to particular users in various formats on particular frequencies, e.g. I want to send this out every day or weekly. For instance, on a Monday at 9 AM, this particular report will be in the inbox of the scheduled people. On another side, here we can at the top group together lots of different types of reports and dashboards. So where we've gone off and built particular table reports, graphical reports, tile-based reports, these can be put onto groupings of pages, authorized to particular users, and then they're able to see a combination of particular reports together on a page. So be it whether it's tile-based, map-based, or just a tabular-based report, each of those can be put on and equally exported out very quickly. Another function in Concerto is the ability to ingest and use BI reporting. So where BI reports have been externally created, managed, using the data from Concerto, they can equally then be put back into Concerto and viewed directly within the application. And one of the most useful aspects of this is, these really nice, in this case, a Tableau example, where we've got a grouping together of lots of different tabs of data, and in this case, looking at a more strategic estates insights around total cost to eradicate risk and total estate cost per square meters. And each of these can equally be used accordingly. So such as looking at the worst performing buildings from an EPC rating and those that have the highest cost, and therefore using this information and data to be able to make the correct strategic decisions. One final note in Concerto in terms of innovation is that we are also beta testing the use of AI, in this case OpenAI, as the platform that we are trialing, to be able to interrogate particular complex data sets. So in this particular example that you see on screen, I'm looking at a condition survey report that has been uploaded to the AI tool that then is able to correlate and look at the particular data fields. And then I'm able to pose it questions. So in this case, the first question I asked it was, can you tell me which sites have the highest risk condition backlog in pounds? It's then gone off and analysed that information and came back with the top 5. Equally, that could, from here I could say, well, I want the top 10, or I want to, apply particular, strategic policies to the use of this information and the returns that I get. In this example, I've been, and one of the kind of real complex examples that I've seen from speaking to many organisations is they kind of say, I've got X amount of money and I want to be able to interrogate that data set to make the right decisions in terms of how we spend that to best look at the particular highest risk condition items. So in this example, I've said, for this culinary delights building, if I only had a budget of £100,000, you've identified £342,000 worth of backlog. If I only had £100,000, how could this be best spent to manage the highest risk items? It then goes off, of course, and analyses that data, comes back with a list of those items, and then has summarised it to how can it best spend that £100,000. Give me a list of those items back, and then equally I've asked it to give me a more graphical view of that information based on priorities. So that's one of the innovation ideas that we're looking at. There's many more that Concerto is working on. But equally, we want to continue working with many of our customers to look at innovation ideas such as AI and incorporate those into the product. Now I'm going to hand back to Mark.
Can I just say how brave you are to do a demo on a live webinar? Because that could have gone terribly wrong.
Always a worry.
Everyone's always really impressed when they're able to see that type of level of information presented back to them in order to make informed decisions and plan accordingly and generate efficiencies. So thank you, Matt, for showing that. I'm conscious that we have gone over somewhat. So for anyone who is still with us, obviously this recording is going to be made available. So those who did have to leave at 1 will be able to see that in the recording that we'll send to everyone. But I've had a question here. Do you run any more sessions on Concerto, Matt? Will you be able to actually work with our attendees and go into their organisation and present kind of the solution, how it ties in, how it can help with their devolution journeys?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we'd be willing to do more more complex kind of deeper dives into the platform. Look, we work with about 90 local authorities today. We obviously want to work with more, and we're positioning ourselves to obviously to demo and to speak with more. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us. I'm sure my contact details will be out along with the recording and such like as well. So absolutely, yeah, feel free to reach out to us or find us through our website and reach out to us, and we can absolutely do a more kind of deep dive demonstration to yourself. And that can focus across the different suites of functionality that we offer. That was a very quick deep dive that I just did, but at a very high level. We can go into the weeds on a lot more.
How important is that before local authorities, I suppose, just go out to market, that they actually have that opportunity to, be on these types of events, see that type of solution available, learn where it's being adapted and adopted elsewhere in other local authorities who are up to different points on their kind of devolution journeys? Is it something that you witness a lot, that actually getting them to see this early on before they even go to procurement gives them a real understanding of what's achievable?
Definitely. I think it's the whole art of the possible. I've spoken to many local authority organisations that are on some very old products that have no development in them, have been using them for years, have no investment into them, and don't offer the levels of functionality that a system like Concerto does. So when we get to actually being in front of them, speaking to them, showing them, they're often very amazed as to all the different data sets that they've had in the background that they didn't know could even be managed in a system like Concerto, how that can now be brought together and utilizing that core data structure and how they can get better insights and outputs. That's what's great in my role and why I love doing what I do, which is to see actually seeing this and speaking to people and them being able to then kind of realize the benefits of putting a system like Concerto in place, and that helping the organization and all that stuff. That's why I do what I do. I love doing that. I love seeing the outcome of it. And obviously speaking to people, understanding their challenges and how we can support them in overcoming those challenges.
So one of the things I got from some of the comments coming through was people are quite worried in terms of the state of their data. If you did go into a local authority next week and it was an absolute horror story when it came to their data, it was all siloed in all different areas, in all different states, but they wanted something like a Concerto. What is it that you'd recommend, and how easy is it for them to be in a situation where they can use it effectively?
I think the first point is I see this time and time again. So almost everybody I speak to is in some sort of state of a mess with data, and some are then some plan. Well, we're going to go out and get some new condition surveys. We're going to go out and get some asset verification done and get a benchmark of our data set so that we've got nice clean data ready to go into the system. But obviously that costs money. So many others are in a case of, well, we've got some data, we've got some people that can help with this, and we're going to work together. Ultimately, that we work with yourselves to understand the different data sets that are possible in Concerto. We work with you, and we have standard import sheets to load that data into the platform. We give you access to our data analysts as part of mobilization to support you in that journey, and they will help and guide. On you call it this over here, we call it that over here, and we ensure then that to make sure that the data comes in the right formats and ready. But yeah, look, there's a big effort sometimes needed on some of this, particularly where we're talking about lots of multiple councils coming together who have different spreadsheets and they manage those with different column headers and such. Like, there is effort needed, and that's effort needed on the organisation side. As the responsibility for managing that data kind of sits with the data owners, the councils. But we absolutely guide and support on that point, and much of that often is but here's the nice, clean, steady state where you want to be. Let's start mapping your data in and start thinking about how we can rationalize this together. Because as I've talked about many times, it's all well and good having all this different data, but if it's not kind of put together in a standardized format, how are you ever going to make any strategic decisions using that data? You just can't, because we're calling it that, they're calling it that, and you need to get to that standardized format. So that's an important thing, and many organizations, even within themselves, and they start bringing in data sets from within the business, they start realizing, they're calling the properties different things and managing it in different ways. And, the output of this is, whilst there is a bit of effort needed, the output, the outcome of doing it is, it can be vast. So definitely worth doing.
I think I've kept you long enough. I think I've kept our delegates long enough. There was 12 other questions I had here that I'd not even got to. All the questions and comments that have come in as well. Sorry if we've not got to them, but we'll share them with both Matt and James after today. Thank you very much for joining us. This has been a GovNews webinar on devolution equals seismic revolution. Thank you very much for joining. Have a good day.